In times of emergency, and at every critical time, there's always someone that brings you credible information to ensure accountability and expose the truth. It takes independence.
У нас все равно уже существует дозированное право на получение и распространение информации.
It takes courage.
عمليات الإبادة، جرائم الحرب، جرائم التعذيب تحاول أن تلبس لبوس قانوني.
It takes tenacity to bring you a reliable story. Despite repression, despite threats.
They filmed me secretly in my bedroom with my boyfriend and then blackmailed me with that video.
Despite persecution.
Reuters reporters Wallone and Yasuu leaving court today after a Myanmar judge found them guilty.
Despite censorship. Journalists put the truth first, sometimes at the risk of their own lives. In recognition of their commitment, we honor them.
When people don't know what is real and what is fake, when facts don't matter, then the voice with the loudest megaphone gains more power.
I got an average of 90 hate messages per hour. And per hour, imagine getting 90 hate messages per hour. I think what we've learned in Rappler is that now, more than ever, the mission, the reason why we became journalists in the first place, that mission, is more important to our societies than ever. We are in an active battle to preserve our democracy. Democracies live in a public sphere where we all have to agree on the facts. This weaponization of social media actually uses free speech to incite hate against perceived enemies or critics of the state. Don't let it happen. We have to keep fighting back.
Everybody can hear me, and now of course we come to the real highlight of our program today, and that is of course the Guillermo Cano Award ceremony. And lovely to see Maria, our prize winner, there as usual. And this is the part, I think, of the program where we really celebrate good journalism and good journalists, many of whom have made very great sacrifices in the course of their work or for doing their job and for obviously performing public service on behalf of the people. So again, good evening to everybody here this late afternoon in Namibia. I'd like to again acknowledge the Right Honourable Prime Minister, Sarah Kukangelwa Amadila, and of course our UNESCO Director General, Audrey Azoulay, other excellencies in the room, including, I see a Speaker of our Parliament, Professor Peter Kajivivi was here. I saw Yvonne Dausab, thank you Peter, Yvonne Dausab, our Justice Minister earlier, so I can't identify the others with masks, but welcome to you all. If I have not mentioned you, please, you are very welcome to this event. Again, I have great pleasure in welcoming you back to the plenary hall. It's an honor to have everybody here, both online and, of course, in person for these awards. So I'm going to now hand over the floor to Zoe Titus. Zoe is the director of the Namibia Media Trust, and she's going to be your master of ceremony for this award ceremony. But before I do so, allow me to throw my objectivity to the winds for a little bit, and just to say what absolutely sterling work Zoe is doing in furthering the goals of press freedom, freedom of expression, and access to information here in Namibia and further afield. And of course, the NMT is also a very proud sponsor of the Guillermo Cano Award. So without further ado, I'm going to leave the podium and I'm going to hand you over to Zoe to take it from here. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Gwen. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to everyone. But before I do that, I'm handing the floor to musical genius in my eyes, young and upcoming saxophonist Susie Isis, to officially start off this award ceremony. Thank you much, Susie, for that intervention. We had to start with music. It is a celebration after all. So again, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone. It is such an honor for me to be guiding you through the ceremony tonight. Also because the organization that I lead, the Namibia Media Trust, has been a co-sponsor of this award since 2018. But let's start with a video message from Ana Maria Busquet de Cano, the president of the Guillermo Cano Isaza Foundation and widow of Guillermo Cano, who was the journalist in honor of which this award is named, a journalist who was assassinated in front of the offices of his newspaper, El Espectador, in Bogota, Colombia, on 17 December 1986.
Que las circunstancias que nos afectan a todos me impidan asistir al homenaje que se rinde hoy a una mujer empeñada en defender, proteger y enaltecer la libertad de prensa en el mundo. Así lo hizo Guillermo Cano durante toda su vida, tal como se solicitó en el Seminario de las Naciones Unidas en Windhoek, Namibia, el 3 de mayo de 1991. Me hubiera gustado mucho entregarlo personalmente el premio a Maria Ressa y decirle cuánto admiramos su labor y su empeño, y a los periodistas africanos que promovieron la creación de un premio a la prensa libre y pluralista hace 30 años. Premio que desde entonces ha enaltecido el difícil oficio de contar al mundo lo que sucede.
Speaking Spanish.
No, Spanish.
Yeah. Put it back.
Cano. Abrazo solidario a todos los periodistas que asisten al seminario que empieza hoy.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cano. This prize, of course, would not exist without the sponsorship of the Cano Foundation. In addition to the Namibia Media Trust, other sponsors include the Helsinki Sanomat Foundation and the Democracy and Media Foundation. But let's get to the business of this evening. Allow me now to ask the members of the independent international jury of the UNESCO Guillermo Cano Prize to come on stage, while we also have connected from UNESCO headquarters in Paris, Mr. Xing Chu, Deputy Director General and Acting Assistant Director General for Communication and Information. So join me in welcoming the President of the UNESCO Guillermo Cano Jury, Marilu Mastro Giovanni, reporter and founder and director of El Taco d'Italia from Italy, and member of the international jury, David Dembele, editor-in-chief of Dépêche du Mali. And now we'll also connect with Manila in the Philippines. Can Maria hear us? There she is. Thank you so much for joining, and I hand over the floor now to the President and representative of the jury. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, UNESCO Director General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The annual UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Prize honors a person, organization or institution that has made an outstanding contribution to the defense and or promotion of press freedom anywhere in the world, and especially when this has been achieved in the face of danger. As too many journalists are unfortunately treated today in the world, we have received many relevant nominees, for which we want to thank all those organizations and entities that submitted candidatures, governments, UNESCO national commissions, as well as international and regional professional and non-governmental organizations active in the field of journalism and freedom of expression. On behalf of the international jury members, composed by Wendy Funes, investigative journalist from Honduras, Hamid Mir, executive editor of Geo Television, Pakistan, Alfred Lela, founder and director of Politico.al in Albania, Zainab Salbi, journalist and TV host from Iraq, and my colleague David Dembele, next to me, from Mali. of the Malian Network of Investigative Journalists. We have recommended Ms. Maria Ressa from Philippines be the laureate of the 2021 UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Prize for the following reasons. Over to you, dear David.
Okay, he allowed me to do it in French. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Alors,
good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Maria Ressa, the chief editor. We would also like to mention that her fight for the freedom of expression deserves to be recognized. And also in the Philippines and everywhere in the world. The security framework is still fragile, and she was condemned after a case of cybercrime for defamation. And Maria Teresa has to face 8 accusations, and she is at risk to spend the rest of her life in prison, and that she will be judged culpable. We also have a lot of violence online against journalists, and also a lot of negative impact on media platforms.
The situation of Maria Ressa is emblematic of the growing phenomenon of arbitrary, abusive judicial prosecution and the so-called strategic lawsuit against public participation, SLAP. The case of Maria Ressa is emblematic of this global trend, which represents a real threat to press freedom and therefore to democracy.
Alors, malgré les persécutions et
despite the prosecution and also the trouble to which her life is exposed, she resists and is serving as a model for the journalists of her country and everywhere in the world.
By awarding Maria Ressa, UNESCO would bring the spotlight on such concern, as well as encourage and sensitize states to take ad hoc measures to counter SLAP and online harassment against journalists, with particular reference to the one affecting women journalists.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mastro Giovanni and Mr. Dembella. I will now give the floor to UNESCO's Assistant Director General for Communication and Information, Jing Chu, who is connecting online.
Thank you, Chair. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Thank you, Chair. Do you hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you. Please proceed.
Thank you. So, Prime Minister, Director General, Excellencies, members of the international jury, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from UNESCO headquarters in Paris. I would like to start by thanking the President of the Guillermo Cano Izaza Foundation for her participation. I would also like to sincerely thank Ms. Ana Maria Bosque de Cano for her tireless efforts to keep alive the memory of her husband, Guillermo Cano, the brilliant editor from El Espectador who fought against the corruption of the drug cartels in his country and paid the highest price for the search of the truth and the exercise of press freedom. I also like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the sponsors of the prize. They are Democracy and Media Foundation, Stitched in Democracy and Media, the Helsinki Sanomat Foundation, and the Namibia Media Trust, whose Executive Director, Ms. Zoe Titus, is moderating today's ceremony. Thank you very much to Ms. Mastro Giovanni, the President of the International Jury, and to Mr. Dembele, member of the Independent Jury, for having so well articulated the justification for this year's choice. Please convey my regards to all members of the jury. At a critical time for humanity, the need has been never stronger for professionals committed to reporting the news. With a career spanning over 30 years, this year's laureate has dedicated her life to practicing press freedom. Throughout your career, Ms. Ressa, you have embodied the courage and commitment of independent journalism in the face of countless threats and relentless pressures. Despite being the target of vicious online attacks, you have remained committed to holding the line and fighting back violence and harassment against the journalists. Your integrity, dedication, and professionalism are of inspiration to many across the globe to continue the fight for facts and to take a stand for the values and principles of free, independent, and pluralistic journalism. Ms. Ressa, in my capacity as Acting Assistant Director General for Communication and Information of UNESCO, I am extremely honored to virtually deliver the 2021 UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Award to you. This delivery is symbolized by this diploma, which I am now holding in my hand and will be sent to you together with the awarded amount of $25,000. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in expressing our warmest congratulations to the 2021 winner, Ms. Maria Ressa, with a big round of applause in presential and virtually. Very much. Windhoek, back to you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director General. And the moment you've all been waiting for, I'm sure, to hear from the winner of the 2021 UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Award. It is my honor to introduce Maria Ressa.
Thank you so much to UNESCO, the independent jury, the more than 80 press freedom and news organizations who've helped us hold the line. This is for Rappler and all Filipino journalists who, despite the increased risks just to be able to do our jobs, continue to hold power to account. It's also a reflection of how the world looks at the Duterte administration today and the death by 1,000 cuts of our democracy happening in front of your eyes. I wish I were with you today in Namibia, but I'm in Manila, prevented from traveling by court order, which I continue to fight as state-led legal attacks are waged against me on multiple fronts. I also can't travel because my nation is suffering the consequences of putting retired military generals in charge of a public health crisis, when political patronage and loyalty not competence, is the metric of power. This is a time when lies and incompetence kill. In less than 2 years, the Philippine government filed 10 arrest warrants against me. In 2017, government propagandists tried to trend the hashtag Arrest Maria Ressa. They failed, but they kept at it, and 2 years later, I was arrested twice in a little more than a month. They violated my rights when they prevented me from posting bail and detained me overnight. I suppose they wanted me to shake and feel their power. To the budding dictators of this world, if you have to abuse your power to make you feel powerful, you're not powerful, just abusive and small. What I and other truth tellers in the Philippines have lived through has given us firsthand experience of how the law and law enforcement have been turned against our people. Now more than ever, power and money rule. In 2016, 4 months after Duterte became president, Rappler and I wrote investigative pieces showing you how the first casualty in our nation's battle for truth is the number of people killed in our brutal drug war. That violence was facilitated, fueled by American social media companies. Based on big data analysis, we reported the networks that were manipulating us online, targeting and attacking truth tellers, pounding to silence anyone challenging power, which created an extensive social media propaganda machine. 5 years ago, we demanded an end to impunity on 2 fronts: Duterte's drug war and Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook. Today, it has only gotten worse. And Silicon Valley sins came home to roost on January 6th with mob violence on Capitol Hill. What happens on social media doesn't stay on social media. Online violence leads to real-world violence. Since 2016, I've felt like Sisyphus and Cassandra combined, repeatedly warning that our dystopian present is your future. American biologist E.O. Wilson said it best: we're facing Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Social media, with its highly profitable micro-targeting, has become a behavior modification system, and we are Pavlov's dogs, experimented on in real time with disastrous consequences. Facebook is the world's largest distributor of news, and yet studies have shown that lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further than really boring facts. The social media platforms that deliver the facts to you are biased against facts, biased against journalists, biased against meaningful conversations. They are, by design, dividing us and radicalizing us. This is not a free speech issue. It's not the fault of its users. These platforms are not merely mirroring humanity. They're making all of us our worst selves, creating emergent behavior that feeds on violence, fear, uncertainty, and enabling the rise of fascism. Think of it like this: without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without trust, we have no shared reality, and it becomes impossible to deal with our world's existential problems. The coronavirus, climate, the atom bomb that exploded in our information ecosystem when journalists lost gatekeeping powers to technology companies. Tech abdicated responsibility for the public sphere and couldn't seem to fathom that information is a public good. Women, people of color, the LGBTQ, those already marginalized, become even more vulnerable, as you'll see in the UNESCO report, The Chilling, whose lead author, ICFJ's Julie Passetti, convinced me to speak up when my attacks began many years ago. Of course, there's a cost to speaking truth to power. On Christmas Eve, 2 years ago, Amal Clooney sent me an email. Until then, no one had really had the time to go through the many ludicrous charges I'm facing and their penalties. Turns out, I could go to jail for the rest of my life. By her last count on paper, it was more than 100 years in prison. So I dealt with the sinking feeling in my stomach. This is my lawyer telling me that, right? I took away a lesson. Don't open an email from Amal on Christmas Eve. Sometimes you just have to laugh. Believe it or not, I'm lucky. When you're the target of attacks, you're the only one who sees it all. But you can also see exactly how the tactics change. Knowledge is power. And because I spent 2 decades of my career outside the Philippines, the international community knows me, the quality of my work, my values, my work ethic. So many others aren't so lucky. Like 35-year-old Richie Nepomuceno, who accused the police of extortion, torture, and rape. She was one of at least 3 Filipino women who filed charges against 11 policemen who they said held them inside a secret room at a police station. Less than 2 weeks ago, on April 19, Richie was walking down the street when she was shot and killed. Human rights activist Sara Alvarez and another colleague were set to testify against the government and the military. She went as far as asking for court protection, which was at first denied and is still on appeal. Last August, she was walking home with her dinner. She had just bought it when she was shot and killed. So was her colleague. No one is left to testify. I could go on. Now let's go to the journalists. Frenchie May Cumpio, still in jail, celebrated her 22nd birthday in prison. Arrested and jailed more than a year ago, it is a familiar tactic. You get an arrest warrant, do a raid, then charged with possession of illegal firearms and explosives, a non-bailable offense. That's also what happened to Lady Anne Salem, another young journalist. Arrested last December, Salem said the police planted evidence in her apartment, but another judge voided her arrest warrant. It still took time before she was released, forcing her to spend 3 months in prison during a pandemic. Because she's a journalist. It's not a coincidence that these victims are women. This February, Senator Laila de Lima, whom Amnesty International calls a prisoner of conscience, began her 5th year in prison. She calls it lawfare, when law is used as a weapon to silence anyone questioning power. The cuts to democracy are bleeding. They're overwhelming and can't be ignored. Last year, just 2 days after World Press Freedom Day, Filipino lawmakers, nudged by President Duterte, shut down ABS-CBN, once our largest broadcasting network, our largest news group, also headed by a female journalist. Thousands lost their jobs. Around the same time that Hong Kong passed its draconian security law, the Philippines passed an anti-terror law that sparked 37 petitions at the Supreme Court to declare it unconstitutional. Under that law, anyone some cabinet secretaries call a terrorist could be arrested without a warrant and jailed for up to 24 days. Here's one last fact. More lawyers have died under the Duterte administration than in the 44 years before he took office. So here's the thing. Our problems can't be solved from the Philippines alone. Again, something I've said repeatedly. What's local is global, and what's global is local. As we face the coronavirus, there's an equally dangerous and insidious virus of lies unleashed in our information ecosystem. It's seeded by power, wanting to stay in power, spread by algorithms, motivated, created for profit. A business model Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. The reward is your attention. And all this is linked to geopolitical power play. Last week, the EU slammed Russia and China for their intensified vaccine disinformation campaigns. Last September, Facebook took down information operations from China that were campaigning for the daughter of Duterte for president next year, our presidential elections. That network was creating fake accounts for US elections, and it was attacking me. The virus of lies is highly contagious. They infect real people who become impervious to facts. It changes the way they look at the world. They become angrier, more isolated. They distrust everything. In this environment, the dictator wins, crumbling our democracies from within. I became a journalist 35 years ago when people power in the Philippines helped spark democracy movements around the world. I had the great privilege of reporting on much of Southeast Asia's transition from one-man authoritarian rule to democracy. Inevitably, there's this one moment when power and money chooses status quo or change. In the Philippines in 1986, it was an elite family's banner at a protest rally that helped open the floodgates that ousted a dictator. In Indonesia in 1998, months of student protests led nowhere until the business community and the military stepped in, ending nearly 32 years of Suharto. Those with power and money must choose. Ask yourselves these questions. Who are you? What do you stand for? What kind of world do you want in the next decade? The more you have, the more you must risk, because silence is complicity. Whether you're at the UN or heading a nation or a corporation, or you're a politician, human rights worker, a journalist, or a citizen, fight and win your individual battle for integrity. At stake is our collective global future. Please act now. Courage on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. You truly are an inspiration to journalists all over the world. Continue to hold the line. I hope that you won't leave us. Is she still online? May I ask the Prime Minister and the DG to come to the podium for a photo opportunity with Maria, if you don't mind? Oh, the screen. On my left. I'm getting the instructions. To my left, please. Here she is. On that side. Okay, let me just. Okay. Oops. Right. And there she is. Congratulations once more, Maria. Please hold on. We don't want to lose you. But now we go into another musical intervention with young violinist Ronaldo Candume. We will hear a little more from Maria Ressa just after this performance. Maria, I think everything is under control. You can leave us now. We will be playing a shorter video a little later. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ronaldo. And this brings us to the end of this award ceremony, ladies and gentlemen. I leave you with a last word from the winner, Maria Ressa. She is being interviewed here by BBC journalist Sharma Khalil. Thank you, Maria Ressa and Shamai.
Maria, how's it going?
It's going okay. I mean, like everything, right? It feels like this is stretched on for such a long time, but this moment, good.
Well, let's start with congratulations. This is, it's been a tough year for everyone, and I think, very well deserved award, the UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Award for you, whose life work really has been about press freedom. And this is definitely going to be the core of our interview, but I actually want to start with just how are you? I think if the pandemic taught us anything, it's that one question makes a whole lot of difference. So yeah, how's it been?
It's hard to answer, right? I mean, this is actually a good thing for journalists in the Philippines. And I make no mistake, this isn't really about me as much as also the view of the world of the Duterte administration and how tough it is to be a journalist today in the Philippines, to try to keep doing what we do. This is my 35th year as a journalist. People power. 1986 was when I became a reporter, and kind of like the euphoria of that, that we could do wonderful things, and to be here 35 years later is just heartbreaking. February was the 35th anniversary of the People Power Revolt. So present moment of the past, melancholy, pained because of, we have not only the deaths of the coronavirus, but the brutal deaths of the drug war, the number of people, that's the first casualty in our battle for truth. But I think personally, it's more that this is the 5th year. It's tiring, but at the same time, I just come up for air and I keep looking for hope. And the hope comes, because I just remember why we do what we do. I think that's the big thing for me, at least. When I came under attack as a journalist, and it kind of makes, still part of me gets uncomfortable when someone calls me an activist or a freedom fighter, because I grew up in an age when I used to fly into countries, tell the story the way I see it, and then come out, and you don't feel the repercussions as much as living in the country, right? So you can say and write and show with very little real fear. Well, this has been the 5th year where I truly have to think of worst case scenarios. In less than 2 years, the Philippine government filed 10 arrest warrants against me. I mean,
it's 10. I got 8. The numbers I have are 8 arrest warrants, 2 arrests, and 1 detention. They may be more.
8 arrest warrants was in 2019. That's true. Then in 2020, I got my 9th in November. And then my 10th was January this year. And I haven't done anything differently. I know the standards and ethics. I mean, I wrote the standards and ethics manual for 3 other news groups. And I was with CNN when it grew. One of the biggest things that we dealt with was, I don't know if you even remember Operation Tailwind. That was, I was a young reporter then. So I've watched our industry evolve. And I guess when that's such a tough question. I'm still answering the how are you? I am good, fighting for my rights, both as a citizen and as a journalist. I'm not going to willingly, voluntarily give up my rights.
I think what is fascinating, but also in a way terrifying about the picture that you paint is the amount of things that you're up against. And I'm not just referring to the 10 arrest warrants or the constantly living under a threat of being arrested, but it's also, for your job as a journalist, and I guess it goes for all of us as journalists, trying to tell the story as is, there was always a dichotomy of telling the truth to power,
yes,
presenting a counter narrative. And then social media happened, and that kind of has changed the landscape in a way that we're still dealing with. So I want to bring it to the theme of this year's World Press Freedom Day. The theme of this conference is information as a public good. And yet we live in a world of misinformation, which is the inaccurate falsehoods, but also disinformation, which is the deliberate spread of falsehoods. And I'm just wondering, as a journalist, what you feel you're up against in your daily struggle. Because yes, of course, the people in power, the traditional power, the strong men of your country, my country, our respective countries around the world, but also the other real power, if you will, those behind the big tech companies and what that has done to democracies around the world.
What could I tell you? Thank you for asking that question, because I think that is what's changed, right? So, where do I begin? I've always said,
for you personally, let's begin for you personally, for your job, for what you do on a daily basis.
So, when I was with CNN, I ran conflict coverage for most of Southeast Asia. The end of almost all the strongman rulers in Southeast Asia, I covered that. The end of 32 years of Suharto in Indonesia, I was lead of that. East Timor, when really actually it was in Indonesia and then East Timor where journalists became targeted, because during that time, before 1998 or 1999, we could kind of be like the Red Cross and walk into conflict and war zones. And if we told people we were journalists, we were relatively safe and in fact welcomed so that we could tell the story. Well, 98, 99, 2000 into Iraq, that's when we became targets, right? And it's not as dangerous as it is today, because today the target is every day, every minute, with you all the time, and very, very personal. So I think today, I should have shut that off. It's actually turned off.
Don't worry about it.
Look, today, I think it is more dangerous to just be on social media than it was when you would go into a war zone, because when you do that, you know exactly where the shooting is coming from. You plan your contingencies. You know your way in, you know your way out. And very rarely do you get surprised when you're with your team, right? And you're there.
The front lines are clear.
Exactly. You know which side is shooting at which side. And even when it's crazy, like let's say, in Indonesia, in Ambon, religious violence, Muslims versus Christians, and they had checkpoints at every different parts of the block. And, what we did was to then have one car with two people who were Christian and another car with two people who were Muslim. And depending on who was in the checkpoint, they would lead and carry through. You could do a plan. And you weren't alone. This time around, the target is the only one who sees all of the threat. And it is massive. It's like having a tsunami come at you. In 2016, when we exposed the propaganda machine on Facebook, I was inundated on a per hour basis with 90 hate messages per hour. That was on an average, because there was a certain point where at the beginning, I was trying to respond. And then at a certain point, nobody was listening, right? Yeah. So this is personal. The threats are visceral. UNESCO, for World Press Freedom Day, came out with a report. Exactly. It's called The Chilling. It's psychological. It plays with your mind for sure. It's mental, and it's physical. So you can see that I'm not. Let me put it this way: the very platforms that deliver the news today are the same platforms that prioritize the spread of hate speech, of lies laced with anger and hate over really boring facts, right? We spend our careers learning how to tell compelling stories built around facts so that people in the public sphere get the information they need, right? But if we just gave people facts, the brain will just reject it and won't care. And you're a good journalist because you know how to tell a good story. Well, think about it as an entire clean slate. It's not about telling a story anymore. It's about telling the most ridiculous, incendiary lies. And the platforms that distribute facts and news will prioritize the spread of that, the reach of that over facts, right? So what's happened? Social media has become a behavior modification system, complete with its micro-targeting. Beyond that, social media also has enabled the rise of these cheap armies that have literally, in plain view, torn our democracies apart. If you look at the top 10 countries where social media delivers the news, it's not a coincidence that they are countries where, except the United States, I think the United States is now after Trump, but they were countries that actually had helped, enabled populist authoritarian style leaders, and many of them use that power to crumble democracy from within with the help of these networks, which misinformation.
Which I think, begs the eternal two questions when we talk about these things. One is, where do you stand as a journalist in that world right now? Because the power, again, you're up against two very powerful elements. One is docent power, literal power in any country, who use the other type of power, social media, to then propagate. Where do you stand, and where does the work happen? Because again, the thing is, it's relentless and it develops and it changes all the time. And what's interesting as well, if you see quotes from Mark Zuckerberg, for example, which is part of Facebook's ethos is to help people build communities or bring people together. Well, it's become very obvious that that's not happening. But I want to come back to the role of the journalist in all of this, especially because of the noise.
I actually think so. We were the gatekeepers that protected the public sphere, right? We were accountable for doing that for many, many years. And I would peg 2014 was when it really began to change. And I would look at, what happened in the Ukraine, in Crimea, and kind of the dual realities that were there. And then the rise of instant articles on Facebook, when it enticed news organizations to come into the same system and did not change the algorithms, right? So the very same algorithms that spreads the joke or what you had for dinner are the ones where news organizations compete. I think you said two things. Where do we stand? Look, in 2016, and I really feel I'm so tired of myself because I've been saying this since 2016, right? In 2016, we stood up and said, stop the impunity. And they were two. And you actually pegged both of them. The first is President Duterte and his brutal drug war, the state that is using its power to enable the destruction of our Constitution and the death by 1,000 cuts of our democracy, the killings of, according to human rights groups, tens of thousands of people, right? That's one. But the second one was very clear also. The piece that I wrote in 2016, the second title was How Facebook Algorithms Impact Democracy. It's Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. They have to stop the impunity because in every country around the world, including the United States, including the UK, including Australia, in every country, you see how these cheap armies have infiltrated our information ecosystem because the gatekeepers, the new ones who have abdicated responsibility technology, have allowed them in. And it's almost like as we fight coronavirus in the real world, here's a virus of lies. And when these virus of lies, when RT seeds in August 2019 election fraud, and the same thing goes as a meta-narrative and pops out of President Trump's mouth after, actually right during the presidential elections, November 2020, this is not a coincidence. This is the same kind of methodology that's happening in the Philippines. So here's the upside for me. What do we do as journalists? Well, for me, in 2016, I realized this was something different. That quote from Conrad, Heart of Darkness, it was terrifying when I realized what was really happening. And this was in 2016, and I began to sound the alarm. And I think many of my colleagues, they're probably too nice, but I remember being in NewsLab, in Google, in Mountain View, actually saying, what is happening to us is coming for you, right? And then I wrote, look, I think people were patient. They didn't quite understand it because you don't get it until you are the target, until you see it, right? So since I became the target, I'm an investigative journalist and I run our business. I run the business and the tech in Rappler. It actually allowed me to study it. So at a certain point, I learned to take these attacks and kind of take them apart, right? Let natural language processing take care of it, all of the messages, and then look at the networks that were doing it, the recidivist networks, and to actually point them out to Facebook, to bring them to Facebook. And to Facebook's credit, they did 4 takedowns in the Philippines, including the September takedown last year, where they took down 2 networks of disinformation. One, which we started sounding the alarm at the beginning of the year, was connected to the Philippine police and the military. And they were targeting journalists, human rights activists, opposition politicians, essentially calling them terrorists. In the Philippines, we call it red tagging, right? So they took that network down. President Duterte threatened them, right? So they felt maybe a little fraction of what journalists feel when we speak truth to power, right? So they maintained it. The second one was even scarier because it came from China. This Chinese information operations was targeting all of Southeast Asia and the United States, but it was most effective in the Philippines. And what was it doing here? It was campaigning for the daughter of President Duterte. We have presidential elections next year. Duterte cannot run again, but apparently his daughter is. That's how we knew the Chinese influence operation. It was attacking me and Rappler, and it was also essentially sanitizing the reputation of the daughter of Ferdinand Marcos, Amy Marcos, who's a senator today. The other thing it did was to create fake accounts for the U.S. elections using AI-generated photos, right? That's taken down.
So in a way, it sounds to me like you're at Rappler, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're almost doing 2 parallel things. You're doing the news work, which is to bring news and stories to people. That's a day-to-day, but you're also doing investigation of a different kind. You're doing misinformation and disinformation investigations as well, which is really interesting because you see that happening with so many networks at the moment that they almost feel like they need a misinformation or a conspiracy busting, parallel to all of this, because it just feels like providing information is not enough anymore. It's that this is the truth, but also beware that this is happening. And I'm just wondering, and again, I must confess, it's different because, we consume news differently as journalists, but for the general public, this must be overwhelming, but exhausting as well. What do you do with public fatigue? Especially if you're provided an echo chamber where you hear what you want to hear, frankly.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first, the way we dealt. So let me talk about the way we dealt with it in Rappler, and then how I saw our public evolve, how I saw the division happen in plain sight, right? So in Rappler, I was executive editor, meaning I was the top of our editorial chain, right? But I held it up until actually November last year. I gave it up for a lot of reasons. One is, it's time. I'm 57 years old. I'm in a different generation, and
don't look at.
That's. I think President Duterte has given me more gray hair. But so the other reason is also because I can't pretend that I don't know that rights are being violated. I can't pretend that I don't know which officials are lying. I can't pretend. And that is part of kind of the shift in thinking, right? In some ways, old power, and I will put journalists in that, right? We still kind of held on to the old world where we expected power, the people we do stories on, to stick to these unwritten rules that we used to have. They don't. Yeah. They don't, right? So to pretend like it is, it's like the climate deniers. And so I think in that sense, I realized I needed to start speaking. And so I don't get offended anymore when I'm called an activist, because guess what? The other thing I realized was that when facts are being debated, when there are alternative visions and they're all facts to people in the same society, I mean, talk about the matrix, right?
Absolutely. Especially in a time of a pandemic.
Well, at a time when lies kill, right? But I would say when that happens, then journalism is activism, because the facts are not debatable, right? Whether I'm holding a Coke Zero or not is not debatable. But and this is where you move into group psychology and you walk into emergent behavior, which is what the social media platforms refuse to bring into the discussion. Individual people behave differently. We can still exercise free will, right? Of course, that's one of the questions I have right now is, with this all the time, can we? But so we exercise free will, but you put us in a small group, we begin to behave differently. And this is like there's so many sociological studies that have shown this. The experiment I remember is that Solomon Asch, where he just, a small group of people come in and they have to choose the shortest line. But the test case is at the end, right? And everyone before him has chosen the longest line, saying it's the shortest. And 75% will follow the group. That's just a small group. Now, think about when you have, what does Facebook have? 3.2 billion or 3.7 if you include.
I was going to say, multiply that by hundreds of millions.
Then you have emergent behavior. And this is what is happening to society. You also add in things like the degrees of separation. In the physical world, we used to have 6 degrees of separation. And that would be the cluster. That would be how fast information can spread, right? These would be social networks. In the virtual world, on social media, that 6 degrees is down to 3.75 on Facebook. It's down to a little bit. Each social media platform has something slightly different, but all significantly lower than what our physical brain and surroundings have enabled, right? So anyway, I guess I'm just saying that that social media platforms are fundamentally changing our behavior.
I just want to pick up on that point, actually. In your work, in your daily work, and in, I would say, the last maybe 4 years, when the real paradigm shift happened, if you will, how did you, in the Philippines, how do you see the behavioral change in the way people get their information? And is it generational?
No. So this is where we really are a petri dish for what is coming your way, because for 6 years in a row now, Filipinos spend the most time online and on social media globally. That's 6 years running, right?
Across the generations.
Across the last 6 years, right? So, and Facebook is essentially, so we have about 109 million population, but about 70% are on the internet. And that 100% of the people on the internet are on Facebook. So Facebook is our internet. And, when I met Mark Zuckerberg, I tried to tell him how powerful the platform is, thinking like journalists that he would find that incredible, right? It's very, very humbling to have that much power. Well, I told him at that point, it was something like, 75% of the people on the internet are on Facebook. And I told her that. I told him that, and he kind of said, no, sorry, it's the other way. So at the point, I told him 97% of the Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. And he kind of looked at me and he just said, wait, Maria, where are the other 3%?
I knew that's what he was going to look at. Why is it 100%?
Right? So, well, now it's 100%. So a year later.
But joking aside, I mean, this kind of power that we talk about, I mean, 100%, it's absolute. Like, no one has that kind of power. And I know we're running out of time. I can talk to you for ages. I have 2 last questions. One is, I'm still I'm still taken by what you've described in terms of a war zone, that you've compared social media now to a war zone. And I'm just wondering, looking to the next 5 years, the next challenges, how do you see the future of journalism? If someone is getting into journalism now, what would your advice be? What would their best tools be? And what are they getting into?
I love the question. And you know what? Strangely, I am actually hopeful, because this is that moment of creative destruction. I'll finish answering the last question, which is I studied this, exactly what was going on social media, how we are being manipulated, because that is my foundation for reality, right? Otherwise, if you don't have the data, if you don't understand how we are being manipulated, how we are being, polarized and radicalized, how the design does that, then you would think that we still live in the old world. That's the first. So how do we deal with it? And this is something that's in the pillars of Rappler, right? Because we're actually building for the future. You have to think that everything we knew is destroyed. Like this is like after the 9/11 attacks. And I'll go even a step further. It's after the atom bomb exploded at the end of World War II. That is that kind of moment globally, right? And so 3 things for me. And they're the 3 pillars of Rappler. Solution comes from tech, journalism, and community. Right? Technology. The first is to put guardrails on these extremely powerful platforms that should be beyond profit, right? That should be beyond just that motive. Surveillance capitalism is what Shoshana Zuboff called it in her book, right? And the second thing is what we did as a news organization is we rolled out a platform last year. We built our own because, journalists did something not very smart. We didn't understand the technology in a decade ago when Facebook came out, when Twitter came out, and we outsourced the most powerful part of what we do, which it's not the content, it's the relationships. So every news group that put a Facebook button or a Twitter button out gave that to someone else. Why do we do that, right? So we built a platform.
Well, relevance, I would say.
It's not relevance as much as why didn't we build it ourselves? Why did we not that, I'm just telling you that I think the future of journalism is intertwined with tech. And several years ago at Facebook, I actually said, guys, you're going to have to get the journalism involved, because if you're not going to protect the public sphere, who will? Well, look at what's happening now, right? It's starting in the United States, but they're bringing in and they're calling it individual newsletters, which anyway, let me not go there. So let's say, tech, journalism needs to survive. So in this time period, I sit on the advisory board of many different groups trying to think about the future. But one of them is the International Fund for Public Interest Media, which is trying to raise $1 billion a year to help small and medium-sized news organizations, independent news, public interest media to survive this. I keep doing this. That's my code for the valley of death, right? There's a valley of death right now. If we survive this, then we can keep going forward. And then finally, the last part is, look, journalists, sometimes we forget that so let me just put it this way. The elevator pitch of Rappler in 2012 is that we build communities of action, and the food we feed our communities is journalism. These communities of action impact our world. That was how I measured the metric of Rappler, because in the end, I was tired of throwing stories into a black hole. What I wanted is, these stupid idea of technology actually jump-starting development in a country like the Philippines. And we were able to do that up until 2016. So there is a solution. And the first step is to really, I keep appealing to Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google, because these now rule our lives. They are the new gatekeepers, and they must take responsibility, because even if they give it to an algorithm, the algorithm was created by them. And it has there's a film called Coded Bias. It has their coded bias. So in enlightened self-interest, I'll end it with this. Great quote by an American biologist who studied ants, right? So this is why I like emergent behavior. So he studied ants, and he said that the greatest crisis we're facing, this is E.O. Wilson, he said that we're dealing with Paleolithic emotions. Our brains haven't changed, our emotions. So Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, they're still in the old world, and godlike technology. And I am actually absolutely certain we must find our way forward. And I think this year, next year, they have to be pivotal, because you've already seen the impact from 2016 to today. And when I watched what happened on January 6th on
Capitol Hill, yep.
It was not a surprise, right?
Yeah. And also it's this manifestation of what's virtual is real, in its ugliest forms, I guess. If you think this is only happening online, well, it's real. We're running out of time, and I'm sorry for, I apologize to those who are recording, because I know we've kind of, we've gone over, but I have one last question about power. I mean, your life's work is about standing up to those in power, telling the truth. You've paid a price for that. You continue to pay a price for that. You've witnessed, as you say, world-changing moments. You've witnessed division within your own country among the public. Your country is battling not just the drug wars, but I think the ethos of this as well, and with a strong man. I want to end this on the theme of power. And in your work, where do you think power lies now? Do you think it lies with the political power, or do you think it lies with the big four, the tech powers?
I would say power and money, right? That's always been what we have held to account as journalists. It's power and money. And so many of the reasons why the world is the way it is today is because of that. I rail in the Philippines. Why do we accept this? Because it is power and money. The answer is both, right? Like the enabler is technology. It accelerated a trend that had already started. And I would peg the start to 2014 again. In 2014, I saw kind of this nostalgia for strongman rule. In India, Modi was elected. I was covering the Indonesian elections, world's largest Muslim population, right? And there, the former son-in-law of Suharto, Prabowo, almost won. By just a squeak, he almost won, and Jokowi took over. But I could see that in the United States, I could see the world had changed so fast. And this is the irony. When the world changed so fast, I think people wanted someone else to make their decisions. And so that's when you came into this kind of, in the Philippines, I saw it with Marcos, the kind of nostalgia for someone else to make the decision. Technology enabled that. The rise of digital populism, this was always there before, but it is almost unstoppable in the virtual world, given the way the social media platforms are designed and the way they work. So, look, I guess we haven't lost our power yet. The fact that you're talking to me means I'm not the sound of one hand clapping yet. It could be, right? I mean, but rail against the dying light. We're going to keep doing our jobs. So we hold power and money to account. And I hope, I guess
whichever kind of power it is, I guess that's the thing.
Right now they help each other, right? I mean, even look at, anyway, let me not go there because it opens another can of worms. I guess I'll say one thing. I jumped out of the plane. I have a parachute on. I don't know whether it will open. And that's the life I'm living right now. And it's okay, because I know my task in Rappler is to just hold up the sky, absorb the blows so my team can work. And that's working so far. So let's see. We have presidential elections next year. I hope significant changes would have happened both in tech and in journalism, because people are afraid when you have an environment of violence and fear and uncertainty with the pandemic now, right? Fear, uncertainty, isolation. This is perfect for a dictator.
So you're hopeful, though?
always. I have no choice but to be, I mean, there's no other option. And it's actually quite exciting. You asked me about advice for a young journalist. Guys, go in. This is it. This time matters. I mean, you're not going to be asked to make coffee like my time when we first came in. This time matters, right? Yeah. You can start now. Do something better than my generation did.
Maria Ressa, thank you so much. And again, congratulations on your UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Award. Very well deserved and great to talk to you.